Thanks everybody for showing up, especially since I know HD is over in the other room, and I promise to speak more slowly than he does. So this is about role-based access control, so if this is not a really exciting topic for you, the exits are here. And what I'm going to talk about mainly, and actually I'm kind of disappointed that Jim Manico isn't here because he hates RBAC with a purple passion. So I expected he would be like up front and center to heckle me on this. He wants to know if he believes that RBAC is dead or it should be dead. He wants to do it in himself. And I'm here to talk about how, yeah, maybe not so much. So I had my massage in the speaker room, and I had a beer, and now I'm just like all ready to go. So at the same, not quite because it was spilled a bit. So yeah. But, pretty close, actually. So RBAC isn't dead. It does smell sort of off, though, so let's give it a makeover. The old version of RBAC, and probably in a lot of legacy systems that you have seen, it was just a group of entitlements. It's the same thing as a group, pretty much. And you know, if you were a director, you were in the directors group, and you would just add roles whenever you needed more access, and of course the administrator, whoever needed access to everything, just had all the roles, and that was it. So what's really wrong with that? First of all, is really based in the commercial world. So it assumed that you were either an employee of an enterprise or you were a customer of an enterprise. And it didn't have room for anything in between. And so, of course, my brothers in arms who work with me at the Texas Education Agency know that for the public sector, for education, for a lot of other organizations, especially when they're very fragmented and distributed, that's just not the case. And when half of your business is about dealing with people on the outside in a bunch of different capacities, then this, just putting everybody in a little group is not going to work. And then, of course, with some of these roles, you know, they have weird legacy names, and you have to try to figure out, you know, who's in the Spider-Man group? Why does this person even have this access? And it was really all about the entitlements, not about the name. It doesn't reflect different axes of governance. It's not the axes of governance, although that would be pretty cool if you were like chopping things. But I'll talk about that in a minute. And it doesn't support context switching, which is what we really need for a lot of stuff today. So Exhibit A, when you're working for, or on behalf of more than one organization, for example, you're an insurance broker, and you are connecting to an application, but you're representing different insurance companies each time. There may be legal requirements for separation of duties, or like at TEA, we have a bunch of different organizations, districts, institutes of higher education, other agencies, and some people would work on behalf of a bunch of different ones, or at the same time, but they had to have separate sessions each time. They had to be very clear about who they were representing at that time. So you just can't give them union of entitlements. That's just not good. The HR system is another one. You may be the administrator of the HR system and you're an employee at the same time. So you have to be able to switch those, and it's not a good thing when you are the employee and you have all the power, including the power to give yourself a raise. Although that is awesome when that happens. QA tester. It's one of these things that we all know about, we all live about, and it just gets ignored. The fact that QA has to pretend to be everybody in order to test every single part of an application. And that's the other problem, especially if you're trying to scan an application and you have a bunch of different roles. You have to have the tool logging in with different ones at each time so you can make sure you're covering as many pages as possible. So that's a pain in the butt. And the other one is when federation isn't good enough. It's not just the case of you completely trust this organization, any users they put in are fine with you, you're just going to let them have access. That doesn't always work, especially if you are responsible for controlling the information that they're accessing and you have legal responsibilities for protecting it. You can't just transfer that liability to the other organization. You still have to keep some of it. So even though you don't want to manage all those other users, And let's face it, the people who usually make most decisions about access don't have time to actually make those decisions, so they kind of push them off on somebody else. If you don't have time to do that, you have to find a way to let them manage the users, but you still are the final gatekeeper on whether they have access. And I don't know why you TEA guys are here. You know all this already. We've been living with it. And of course, every deputy or administrator assistant ever who has to step in and do something as somebody else on Fridays when the boss goes to the golf course, or developers. And that's another big example that we never ever talk about. That's that they have to be able to play every different role as well, especially when they're troubleshooting in production, which we all know never happens. So what we really need are context-specific entitlements, and I'll talk more about that later. We need clear governance. We need to be very clear about who's making what decisions that pertain to the access and who's making what assertions when it pertains to the individual user. And of course, it needs to be flexible and extensible. I recommend yoga. So let's talk about context plus governance. If you think about it, there may be an authority who vouches for who you are in a particular context. Like they say, yes, you are a student at this university, and we know because we run the university, we issued you the student ID, we know who you are, and we know that you should have access. Then there's somebody who actually owns the data, is responsible for that or for the application, who makes the decision of, yes, anybody who is doing something in a student capacity should have access to this application. So if you split those off, especially when you have a bunch of different contexts coming in with a bunch of different authorities behind them, and again, using TEA's example, if you have a district, you have a campus, you have an auditor, you have, who else do we have? You have internal departments, you have different geographic regions if you're a multinational enterprise. All of those are going to make different assertions about an individual and why they should have access to a particular set of resources. And they're different. If you try to funnel these all up to one decision maker somewhere in the enterprise, it's impossible. You have a user base of 50,000, you're going to be up all night. So the identity authority and I'm just describing it this way, is someone who asserts who you are in a particular purpose. And then they give you a set of context attributes. So they say, yes, you are a healthcare professional. Yes, you are licensed. This guy is now working as an analyst for me, by the way, which is so awesome. Yes, you are a parent of the aforementioned student. You are the author of this book, and therefore you have rights to, edit it or something like that. So any of these and all of these can funnel in at the same time. So it's not about who you are, it's about what you can do. And that's why I want to suggest that we think more of roles as more along the lines of functionality. So you're performing a function, it is struck down by different attributes, like which organization you're representing, or which level you are. You're not allowed to do any transactions over 5 million or something like that. So the scope applies to the function, and then there's a final authorization that comes from somebody who is actually granting the access. So let's just use a really simple sort of example. Professor Plum in the kitchen with a lead pipe. And there are a couple of, could be in the kitchen, could be in the library, could be with a rope, with a candlestick. I guess you can sort of derive the rules, business rules here. That if you're in the kitchen, you can use a candlestick, but if you're in the library, it has to be with a rope. Does anybody see any problem with this sort of diagram, other than the colors on it?
You must have the lead pipe in his pocket.
Yeah, or something like that. The problem is he killing or is he being killed? Because that kind of matters a lot. So let's put that in there. And this is the context. This is the function. Is he killing or is he being killed in the kitchen with the lead pipe? Now this sort of, again, this sort of implies that you can only be killed in the library and you can only kill in the kitchen, so that doesn't really work. Let's expand that a little bit more. If we split this off some more, then you will have probably a kitchen authority who says, you know, when you're doing this in the kitchen, I will make up the rules as to what you can do with what, to whom. And then you will have a library authority who will also make those kinds of business logic decisions. So you're associated if you're working for an enterprise, and again, you know, you could be a citizen, you could be registering your car, you could have a lot of different roles. But let's say you're associated with an organization. So it vouches for you and it approves your functions. It says we would like you to do this on behalf of us. If you own the data, you are approving access to it by the organization and by proxy, those individuals that that organization is vouching for. And you can be any of these roles: citizen, student, subscriber, editor, parent, and all at the same time. And this matters a lot. So for example, in HIPAA, if you are a doctor, your name is not confidential. If it's a patient, it is. And you can become a patient really quickly with a little trip to the ER. So that context switch has to be visible. You have to prepare for it. You have to be able to handle it. This is the sort of thing that I wrote a paper on a couple of weeks ago, something that I call a data event. And this is where any sort of data characteristics change such that the security requirements change. So for example, again, in either HIPAA or FERPA, anything that can be used to identify an individual is confidential. So let's say longitudinal data. If you get the right set of data together, then it can identify the individual. And at that point, when you've done that particular query, then that information becomes confidential. Think about a press release. Before you send it out, it's got to be confidential, and you're running DLP to make sure that Project Biscuit is not being mentioned anywhere. You know, you may have encryption in place, and then all of a sudden, when you make the business decision to release it, it's the opposite. You want it to spread as far and as wide as possible. So that's a data event. The same data, but massive context switch. And so again, the functions in the scope are different depending on the context. Now, a lot of you have probably had to deal with roles, and these are some signs and symptoms that things are just not working too well. They keep getting more entitlements. You keep adding, you know, additional permissions to the same old role, or you just give everybody admin. And what does admin even mean? Anyway, it could be somebody who's the administrator of within an application. If it's somebody's job, for example, to roll up data. It could be somebody outside of the application whose job it is, you know, to start the processes, to keep it running. Or admin could be the administrative assistant down the hall who has a very limited role. It could be an intern. So I hate the word admin. That's very confusing anyway. And then, you know, in a lot of organizations, some people just have legacy roles and they all have them because at some point or another, they had to do a function that that role allowed them to do. So it doesn't mean anything anymore. And of course, you know, the less said about Active Directory, the better. Caveat, do not, and I know this is a little bit late if you already have an application that is using roles, but if you're going to write one, do not ever, ever, ever create roles based on organizational structure. And why? 2 words. Reorg. Mm-hmm. You have to recode your application every time you have a reorg. You're going to be a very unhappy person. And yeah, I don't have to mention the other 2 words, merge-erg. Anytime your company's merging with another one, and you're restructuring everything again, you want your application and its roles to be as flexible as possible so you can adapt to that. Also, do not map a role to a physical device. Not that probably none of you would think about doing that, but I'm just saying it just in case. Because the enterprise is getting increasingly abstracted from the device. In the future, I think we will all be sitting around with a little pile of phones and tablets on a coffee table, and every member of the family will just pick up the closest one and do whatever they need to do. So that's the end game of BYOD. We're sort of in the middle there now, where everything is getting abstracted and getting blurry. With the cloud, it shouldn't matter which servers you're using, you shouldn't know or care, and the same thing with the device. The application shouldn't have to know or care how you're accessing it. Because deep down, the roles reflect our assumptions about what the business function is supposed to be, what these people are supposed to be doing, what they're not supposed to be doing, who they are, and they usually assume that they're going to stay that way. And that after 5 years or 10 years, and you have the same application that is trying to do the job of a bunch of other business functions that got thrown on top of it, these old roles are going to be too static to be useful. So just obviously you have to write a role that describes the functionality that somebody is going to be carrying out, but just keep in mind that it's not going to stay that way.
But isn't that lack of flexibility an implementation problem? So if you're hard coding the roles into your program, then you can't change them. That's an implementation issue, right? So it's not a problem with roles as such.
Exactly. It's in the way that you use them, to quote Eric Clapton. And that's exactly what Jim Manico is on about. If you hard code these roles in, you should be separating in your fundamental design. You should be separating out the dynamic elements so that you can change them more easily. Yeah, I agree. So yeah, it's not that roles are bad. It's how you use them. They can be good or bad. So to sum up, RBAC is not dead. It's not going to be dead. We have so many legacy applications that are using them anyway. It's just that my hope in the future, as we add them and as we design them, that we can look at them from a different point of view, to look at them as functionality rather than somebody's position in an organization or somebody's role, because that's always going to change. The other thing is that in the enterprise, it used to be that enterprises used very different software from what their employees use privately. So if you were using SAP, you knew you were working. That's not the case anymore, because so many enterprises are also using Dropbox, Google Docs. Everybody's using Word. So the only way to tell what your business data is, it's not that you can say if it's in a Word document, it belongs to us, because you can use Word anywhere. It shouldn't matter where it was generated, at what time of day, where they were located, on which machine it was generated. The only thing that matters anymore is the actual data inside. And you have to be able to look at it and say, well, this is talking about something that we as an enterprise are doing, so this is business data. That's how slippery it's getting, and is probably going to stay that way in the future. So I wanted to open this up actually to more discussion for those of you who have to work with us. And I'm sorry about this. I just couldn't resist. Is there anybody who is actually struggling with this kind of thing?
We're working with.
Yeah.
Since it haven't released, so we don't know.
Sorry,
it hasn't released.
Oh, it hasn't released yet. So what are you working on?
We recently integrated with the TIL, that's the TA security system, with the application details that's used educators to apply for the certification. So we use the RBAC methodology, but we add extra layer called permission. So it's kind of adding flexibility to the role. The role can change its function, it can get reorg, but the permission to the applications kind of stay static at this point. So it's kind of mixed match. We think it would work, but we'll see how it works.
Yeah, because I know this is a complete rewrite of a spec, or are you adapting what's there?
Just using the security function. It's a rewrite on security function.
And using what's in TIL.
Yeah, so we don't have to do too much remake for the legacy application.
Let me throw something out there that I've just in the last year or so of trying to work with different folks to communicate and integrate systems. So a problem I've run into that you may be able to help with, or somebody else may be able to help with, is just using the word role. Because in security, I think, I may be aggressive, but I think that in general, most of us mean the same thing in this room by role. But nobody else in the business seems to understand the same thing by role. And so, you were just saying it in your kind of summation or conclusion, that if we think about role as job function or organizational structure or job title, we're planning for failure kind of thing. We're not doing it right. But that's exactly what everybody else seems to understand about role. Role is job title, And so right away, when I'm having a conversation, I finally learned this, is to say, look, when I say role, I don't mean job title. Yeah. I mean something else.
Yeah.
So is there another word that anybody?
So I mean, what I think the problem what you're talking about is that there's role as a requirement, as a descriptive word about describing a requirement around authorization, and role as an implementation. So RBAC is a particular implementation. It is a security methodology system. And I absolutely agree with you when you talk with business folks. When you talk about role, they immediately go to social grouping. What's their job function?
Yep.
And I think that, and I'll full disclosure, I did a talk on this yesterday.
Cool.
So.
Dang, I missed it. I was in Vegas yesterday.
Well, all the talks will be going up online, but for me the challenge was, and part of the genesis of the talk, and there's actually a very long white paper I did on with a friend of mine who's got a lot more app dev experience than I do, was going through a whole, and this doesn't happen very often. I worked at a company, we completely got rid of our old back-end system and brought in a new one. Now I work for a financial services firm, so there is a lot of authorization decisions that needed to be made. Now we took essentially an RBAC process, or an RBAC approach to building it all out, but that alone wasn't enough. So I mean, doing it just by job description, that was part of it. But there was a large part of it that was actually really determined by, basically what client group you were working with. So I work for a stock brokerage. Everything in the brokerage business, at least our business at our company, is geared around what's called a broker ID. This is actually an SEC thing that you have to have a broker ID associated with every client that you have. So now brokers would have multiple broker IDs. People would share, they wouldn't share. It was just a complete, brawl in how brokers basically grouped all these clients together. But that was a separate grouping. That was totally separate from role. And we're working through this whole thing, where I landed with my friend Carl, where we landed in this work, was that you kind of, in terms of extracting requirements around functional security requirements, which are primarily for business users around authorization, we said settle that aside and start talking about things in terms of constraints on functions within the system, constraints either on what functions you can access, what data you can access, or combinations of those two, and you can get really complicated really quickly. And so the other thing that we did was, we threw out, hey, you actually have to do this with clear patterns, because there's common patterns that we've seen, both of us, from just kind of our experience of, things actually, people have these desires of how they want authorization to happen, and they do tend to fall in little clusters. So we talk about requirements patterns in the paper. And RBAC is a great solution for implementing roles, but that's not enough. You need more than that. You can use RBAC to implement non-role-based systems, but again, it's separating the implementation from the actual requirements. And I think that really, the blurring of those two is kind of what led to the failure of a lot of RBAC. So. Sorry.
Great. No, that's great. That's great stuff. Thank you. And you might want to get together and talk.
I think our role implementation is really beyond the job title, but of course it's include the job title, because we end up have a lot of read-only and writable. So you have job title, you can write, but a lot of people, they just want to view. So that's beyond job title.
Yeah.
So I guess the challenge, the way I see it, is that it's a matter of, instead of taking one person and try to figure out what all they should be able to access, and then you have to go through all the, like our security people has to give permissions for this person to be able to do all this stuff. instead of having to just individually, add that person, it's easier to profile somebody, profile something that says with the roles, if you want to call it that, or groups, so that it's easier just to grant them that role or that grouping, and it makes it a lot quicker to to do those permissions. But I guess it's if we're talking about that's not the best way of doing it, what is the solution? I mean, what are we're talking about issues, but what is the best way to do it? What is the best practices in this case?
So I've done a lot of looking around what's out there for implementations, and as far as I can tell, everybody does it differently in every application they've ever built. I know if SAP has its own flavor of authorization. This other system, this other brokerage platform I work with had their own system. And there's never been, as far as I can tell, any effort, or as far as I'm able to find, any effort to actually bring some kind of engineering discipline to how we build these systems. The other thing is I have a hard time talking to the identity management folks since they speak a completely foreign language. And I think part of the challenge is just the level of complexity that you end up with all these various permutations of who you are, what time it is, all the different constraints. I mean, it's almost an infinite number of combinations, and if you try to tackle them all, you're not going to succeed. Although I will put a plug in for a particular product, which is still out there. It's now owned by Dell, but BitQ Keystone for enterprises actually is an attempt to solve this problem. I think there's other solutions out there. So XACML or SACML, right, is another attempt to solve this problem, to be, the Swiss Army knife of authorization. Now, that alone is probably not going to work for you because, again, it's a powerful language, and if the complexity gets out of hand, having worked in security and managed a team of security administrators that have to do provisioning, and this was like, it was a level of re-provisioning of access that was under constant churn. I'm very well aware of the costs of sending out complicated security. So for me, I think the answer is something that is SACML based, like BitQ Keystone, that allows you to basically externalize all that authorization from completely outside of your application. So the developers don't have to worry about it. The developers can't screw it up, and gives you the flexibility to change over time. But also you have to do that within very clear templates, right? So you have to decide what templates are important to you, what meets your security requirements, and you have to stick to those patterns. You have to stick those patterns really hard, and basically you almost have to charge people money, if they want to develop a new pattern, a new template of access control, of authorization that they want to use. So.
Yeah, and I don't think we're saying that you shouldn't group entitlements, because obviously you need to be able to do that. But I would suggest doing it more with a view towards what function are you performing, not what title do you have. So you may be approving purchases, but if if your business rules are going to say if you're above a certain rank, then you can approve this financial amount of transactions, and that's fine. But that should be a scope that that goes under the role.
So touching on that, what you've got there is, it sounds like there's a role around approved purchases, but there's a role about deciding who gets to approve how big the purchase, and things like that. And it may be that today any member of this department has rights to do certain things, but after the reorg or after the merger, that changes. I've seen this fail in one interesting way, which is the clone permissions from failure mode, where you suddenly give up on defining roles at all. And you just say, well, I got to do whatever so-and-so does because so-and-so is going on vacation, so give me whatever they've got.
Give me the Joe role.
Right, and this ties in with the legacy roles, where Joe also used to be the guy 10 years ago who ordered coffee, and so now you get you're allowed to order coffee for the company role because they never got rid of it. One area of research that I read about, and we're actually playing around with a little bit now, there's this language called Topological. It's a platform for distributed authentication decision making. It's built on data logs, so you're doing basically logic programming around deciding who gets to do what and being able to distribute that. to somebody else. So for example, in a Sute-based system, you'd be able to say that the head of purchasing decides which departments are going to have which limits. And now when a purchasing decision gets made, it checks, you go and check, is this person allowed to make purchases? Yes. And you say, well, how big a purchase are they going to get to make? And it says, that's delegated over to so-and-so to make the decision. And the system that so-and-so inputs their information into also speaks Sute, and therefore the decision just rolls right through and it gets made. And when you change departments or change roles, or when the mapping of which departments have which limits changes, it changes automatically everywhere. You don't have this hard-coded mess laying around. It's an open source project. You can go.
How do you spell that?
SOUTEI. It's a dialect of Binder. It's available. The first version was written in Scheme. The latest is Haskell. You can run it on Java, sort of, if you want to port it to one of the languages like that in there. But it's describing the system, so you can implement it yourself. But it's not. You don't have to use their language. But it's interesting research and definitely interesting paper worth reading.
Cool.
Essentially, this is just common transition problem. Easier to do cost-grained access, right? Beginning and row level cost-grained access and easy to implement. And then finally, our application, when the advanced one, we need a fine-grained access. Fine-grained access now scope is introduced. You must put in now that you have a row, but at the end, we command you what by that targeted group. Not only function rows with what function permission you have, but on which group. There are also certain limitations, time limitation, location limitation, all those things introduced as part of scope. And when the project becomes complex, so many features that you put in. In an organization, one time we have scope is for user group, so we cannot, you can manage users in that department. Right? You can do certain things, but only that department, all that group, then it gets sense. Hard to model now. So what that model used by group, by organization, by department, all that kicks in.
So would this be fair to say then it's more about, because we have these disparate applications that may handle authorization differently, that we have these use cases for each one of the applications, and we're trying to really just map it to something that is meaningful to our identity management. And so and I guess that's where the gap is, right? We need to have something, and I don't know if these tools that you're talking about can do something like that, where it doesn't matter what it's called for these use cases and these applications, but we want to be able to say this person needs to do this, 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 and then somehow it maps to that. Is that what we're kind of strive for?
So the tool, the Sackable-based tools will let you pretty much map anything to anything, just because you can. I think there's role-based access control, and now we also have attribute-based access control. And it's my understanding, as far as I haven't done a lot of research on this, that Sackable basically will do everything. Are you familiar with Sackable? Is that a fair statement?
I wouldn't commit to it, but yeah.
I mean, it's very powerful language.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, I think a lot of the challenge is, and we faced this when we had to literally go out to everybody in the company and said, what do your users need access to? The first thing they said was, well, you're the security people, you tell us. Yeah, exactly. We're like, no. So I mean, even just extracting from them, what those requirements are was a huge challenge. And so that's actually what we tackled in the white paper first. So we haven't even really gotten as far as, we've looked at possible implementations. We've mentioned that in the paper, but I mean, we don't even really have a standard approach to gathering those requirements in the first place. So we got to understand what it is that people need and express it in a way that the security people can understand.
In practice, normally they always use combined, right? Hybrid. They always use role-based one plus attribute-based one. In neither one will work.
Yes.
That's not good enough. We must combine. As a role-based one service that will common-based, attribute-based one is a fine-grained access.
Right, but and I think part of the thing is too is that it's not always sometimes it's actually attributes of the data itself that actually dictate the access rather than the attributes of the person, right?
Okay.
So I mean, I think for me that's why this is such a hard challenge. For me, I basically, part of my frustration in doing this was, role-based access controls by itself is not enough. Now you can implement like an attribute-based access control system within an RBAC. It's hard to do it, but again, role-based by itself alone is not enough. But it also doesn't mean it's not useful, because in a lot of circumstances it's very useful.
And nowadays, let's say we try to do cloud computing outright to say, okay, SaaS application access, right? But enterprise outside, what application you can access? You can do LinkedIn or you can do Salesforce, right? Salesforce, different applications inside Salesforce. It's very hard to define role-based, everybody's employee. So what application access? A lot of times, one by one, individual assignment by their managers.
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
And that's,
Yep.
there's even attributes are not generally applied.
And again, that's a big problem, an increasing problem. There are a lot of single sign-on gateways for SaaS now, but the assumption is that the enterprise is trying to control what the employee can access, going outside on behalf of that enterprise. But are you accessing Twitter on behalf of the organization or on behalf of yourself? And can you switch back and forth between those at will? And that's a problem that I
Yeah,
don't
the
know.
single sign-on was the issue, right? Otherwise, they could control in the application. If SaaS application, you re-provision them. But if it's single sign-on, you have to control in the single sign-on portal.
Yeah, and you can access Facebook, but only when you're doing PR for our company. You can't go update your own page. How do you even try to track that? So I think we're going to see, so as you said, it's incredibly complex. So I think we're going to see some relaxing around this, just because the harder you rip, the more it's going to slip through your fingers. So yeah, I think RBAC is Schrodinger's RBAC. It's both dead and not dead at the same time. As you said, it's not enough, and we have to look at it in a different way and wield it a different way. But it's still definitely useful. This is a great conversation. Thanks, guys. Any other thoughts? Todd, you haven't said anything.
Well, I'm still confused about, and I have been for years, about how to get away from the organization. I mean, just take example, admin assistant. We have admin assistants in our organization, but they all do different things, access different data, within these 50 different departments.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one role that they can all put into that does what they need to do. So it's going to have to be organizationally based at some level. And then every 6 months when there's a reorg, yeah, it's extremely frustrating. You have to, rebuild your system again. But I don't know how to get away from it.
Yeah, it's really hard. But I think it's a lot of work, but I think one way is to try to go across and normalize roles where you can. And say, yes, administrative assistants are all generally doing different things, but maybe they're all ordering pencils. So when you go into the pencil ordering system, you're all going to be doing the same function just on behalf of your department. But that is a really...
To extend that example though, because again, this term of role we're talking about as organizationally independent, right? A job title, like an assistant. When instead, in your example, the role is pencil orderer,
mm-hmm.
right? It's not admin assistant; it's pencil orderer. It just so happens that the pencil orderer in Division 1, 5, and 8 are pencil orderer, mm-hmm. and the admin assistant in 2, 3, and 10 doesn't have pencil orderer, right? They only have like notebook orderer or something like that.
Yeah.
It just so happens that when you do it that way, you got like 500,000 roles in a 100-person organization. But I mean, maybe.
Yeah, that's when you back up and go orderer.
Right.
Of pencils.
Right. To go through your tree, right? Your Professor Plum tree. Right.
Yeah.
So is there some good resource on how to model permission and roles?
I would say use Whitepaper.
Yeah.
So the white paper talks a lot about requirements gathering, and again, it's work that's ongoing. so it's transvasive.com. I'm John Benioff. So if you, okay, good. Yeah, please do look at it. I appreciate any feedback. It's really it's a new methodology. It's based on kind of our practical experience, both Carl's and mine. But you know, we don't know how well it's going to work. And again, it's really mainly focused on trying to understand what the requirements are. Now, part of the problem is that with any system, there's always going to be trade-offs, right? So the design solutions, you know, can't meet all of the desired requirements all of the time, right? So I mean, you know, hearing I'm sorry, was it Tim? Tom, hearing Todd, sorry, Todd, hearing you talk about roles, I was just kind of reminded that a big part of roles was created for the convenience of the security administration team.
Yes.
Right.
Which this is important. This is important, right? Because it both allows them to do a more effective job. So it does serve the business needs better. It does give better security because fewer people have authorization to systems they shouldn't have. But these are, I mean, roles were very much a grouping to make the security people's lives easier. I mean, they were based on the fact that those groupings exist in reality. I think for me, the answer is we have to find different groupings and figure out creative ways of implementing those in our systems.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that adds difficulty in it is when you start layering in delegation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? So imagine that you are the head pencil ordering person for the company, and you want to say these administrative assistants are allowed to order pencils, and I'm letting them do that and order off the corporate account or whatever. That makes things extra tricky. So as a person with an administrative assistant, you want to delegate access to my email to the administrative assistant without giving access to everybody's email or access to everybody with the same title I have's email.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that.
Although, to go back to the question of pencil orderer, I mean, in some cases, you just have to say, look, it's going to cost you this much money to implement, controls around controlling who gets access to order pencils. Mm-hmm. Are you really willing to spend that money? And so, I mean, again, it's a trade-off decision. That the more you tighten the controls, the more expensive it's going to get.
Yeah.
If that's probably important in your financial system, especially if you're talking about, let's say, the wire transfer function. Having really tight authorization around that's probably a good idea. But around other things, maybe not. I mean, even looking at SharePoint, right? Do we really care if users do their own administration on SharePoint? I mean, how many people have really tried to solve that problem? Do that, and I don't think that can be done centrally. So I think we have to think about, again, we can't lock everything down. We have to be careful about how we apply our authorization controls.
Tying it back together one more time to the delegation. You may think that the current role-based access control system that you have, or whatever you have, doesn't do delegation. And most people will say, oh, it doesn't do delegation. Well, a lot of these systems that we're talking about controlling access to are access through your web browser. And we're sitting here at AppSecUSA. Every time you log into your web browser, you are delegating every authority that you have, that you've logged into, to your web browser.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if you've got single sign-on across your company for all these different systems, what you've effectively said is, my web browser is now authorized to do everything I've ever been authorized to do. And anybody who takes over my web browser is also delegated the authority to do whatever I've been authorized to do. And relying on that single check at the time of logon or something might mean that all these controls and all these systems that you've built, and whether you've gone overboard and limited who gets to order pencils with erasers on them versus pencils without erasers on them, or gone the other direction and said, look, you can order office supplies, enjoy, or order anything. Either way, you've basically opened the door to all of that, and you might as well not have done it if you are relying on credentials that are submitted automatically by the browser to carry that delegation around for you.
All right, cool. Well, I'm going to wrap this up because we have closing remarks in the ballroom upstairs, and I know everybody wants to go. It's probably 4 o'clock. right now. But thank you all for participating in the discussion. That's what made it really useful, and I suspect you're going to have to be giving out business cards.
Yeah.